What we do all over the country, and specifically in Los Angeles, we work with 1,000 students that we're case managing. That is obviously a number that is likely to grow with students who, over the last several months, have, to put it plainly, dealt with a traumatic experience. And so the concept that people might be having that we start on day one is going to be completely altered, because if a student is not ready to engage or connect, whether that is through technology or because they are dealing with trauma, that they need help, whether it's through one of our mental health specialists or our social workers that we employ and train at communities and schools, Ms. Williams can't do her best work. And so what we have done at communities and schools is had practiced over the last several months. We typically, of course, go where the students are, which are in the schools, but everybody has to reconfigure what the future looks like. So while it was communities in schools, now it's communities in front of screens, communities in front porches, or communities on the phone. And we also have to ensure, because we work with the most vulnerable students, that they have the technology in hand, knowing that even if they have perfect Wi-Fi and connection, that's still only half the battle. To echo what Ms. Williams described, what we focus on is monitoring tools around social emotional health, because we know the science around toxic stress and adverse child experiences. And if we're not confronting that, it will slowly, what we are afraid of, begin this process of not only disengagement from the activities that Ms. Williams puts in front of her, but disengagement from school completely. That of course leads to dropout, that of course leads to these students finding their way into somebody who will find them, whether that is a truancy court, or it is law enforcement, or is in front of a judge. We need to capture these students before that happens, and that's the reason we exist at communities and schools, is to work with that population of students.
Really quickly, I want to get to a viewer question that's true for an estimated 1/6 of the LAUSD population. This is from She Blessed 22 saying, I have no access to the internet or laptops at home. Is there assistance for that? Ray?
Yeah, let me jump in. What we've learned is that there isn't, and we have been ill prepared to deal with all of these structural inequities that we had never been prepared for, because it was a nice to have. For a lot of the families that we work with at communities and schools, the concept of Wi-Fi or even more than one technology device in the home is a foreign concept for the students. So obviously, we're now seeing a huge rush, and there's essentially two tests that this pandemic is going to hold in front of us, that we will have to answer and account to a year from now, is how quickly we were able to respond to this huge gap. We're seeing some private foundations, some philanthropy step up, but it really is the question of what will our legislatures do to fill that gap in, recognizing that that's still half of the test. The second test is whether we are willing to admit that a student's ability to perform academically is impacted by all those things that are non-academic related, especially with our families in LA. And those things have been seen as a nice component for schools. It needs to be necessary to have a trained psych coordinator, mental health specialist who is helping students, especially the most vulnerable populations.
A question now for Dr. Dodd from a viewer, Campeon de Amor. And this question is really for after the schools reopen and kids are back there, I suppose. Now, other than the question is, other than washing your hands and keeping to yourself, what else can I tell my child to do to stay safe? Dr. Dodd?
One of the things that we recommend is definitely for the children, if at all possible, to be wearing their mask. I mean, the same things that were recommended for everybody else in terms of keeping distance, washing hands. If you're ill, if you get up and your kiddo is sick, please keep them home for that one day. And granted, it might just be a little cold, but you want to keep them at home so that you're not, giving whatever germs they might have to somebody else. Actually, COVID, which is the main concern that we have, that we're keeping all the kiddos home, children are doing very well with coronavirus infection. They do pick it up. The thought that children don't pick it up, a lot of kids are picking up coronavirus infection, COVID-19, and they actually picking it up from mommy and daddy and grandma and grandpa. We were concerned that it was going to be the other way around, that the kiddo will pick it up and bring it to the family. No, the family is bringing it to the kid at home.
And just to correct quickly something that the president said a couple of days ago, young children are not immune. They get it, but they may not suffer as ill effects of it as older people or people above the age of 12 or after puberty. For students who have in-person classes especially, what about riding the bus? What advice would you have for people with who are doing that? Dr. Dodd.
Yeah, I would say that the same thing that we're doing in terms of, keeping distancing. I'm assuming that in the bus, like Miss Williams, if her class were to open with 40 kiddos, I would anticipate that they will have perhaps half of the class so that you're able to keep some distancing between children. Children will be kids, and granted, Ms. Williams have teenagers, so they might understand a little more. But if we're talking to a 5, 6-year-old, and granted, a lot of the little kids are being very compliant because they're coming to the office and they're wearing the little mask. But as much as you can, if you're riding the bus, I'm assuming they're going to leave seats in between, and the kids are going to be wearing a mask.
And a question for Kira Williams then from a viewer, Young Trey 92 asks, what is the safety protocol if a student or teacher gets COVID? Does the class get shut down? This again would be after kids are back to class and in-person learning. What would happen?
I think it's too soon to answer that. I don't have the answer to that. That's something that the district and our union will have to figure out. As of now, we're not going to have that situation because we're not opening classes. And also teachers are not allowed to be on campus. Now you can at your own risk, but our union recommends staying at home. So we won't have that issue. We won't see that issue. And I can't really speak on the future because that's really up to our union and the district to figure out how they're going to handle that.
What do you think about outdoor dining, Kira Williams, or outdoor dining, outdoor learning? Can it be provided like outdoor learning? That's a question from our viewer, Amy.
I do think it's possible. I think it's being creative. Unfortunately, I don't think our district is at a point to do that. But I do think teachers at their own risk, if you feel comfortable, I say go for it. I do think it's something that is possible, but you have to be safe. So that's really up to you. How I feel about it personally, I'm staying in. I'm not doing that outdoor learning. I'm staying, on the screen, so you can come see me on the screen. But if you're comfortable, then I say stay 6 feet away.
All right. And of course, this also affects college students. And this is a question for Dr. Dodd from a viewer, Quinny Mama, who asks, is it safe to be in a dorm if you're in a single room? What do you think, Dr. Dodd?
I would say yes. Being in your room, it will be like being in the room in your house. The most important thing is when you get out of the room, what are you doing? Are you wearing your mask? Are you keeping your distance? The problems that we have had in the past 6 weeks or so is that we started lifting restrictions. People started getting together, especially a lot of the young adults, the 20 to 40 start going to bars and doing other things and not wearing their mask and interacting very closely. So that is whatever you do when you're interacting with other people. What we're finding is that the higher incidence of pathology, the people that get it really bad and don't do as well with COVID are those who are in the 60-something and individuals who might be in their 40s, but they have underlying medical problems. So if I had a teacher, for example, that was 45, she's still pretty young, but she has diabetes. Perhaps she might be the person that I keep on the back and I bring the younger patient or a younger person that doesn't have an underlying medical problem. But in due fairness, we're getting a lot of people infected. The numbers are going through the roof, but the mortality rate, the people that are dying and the hospitalization rate is down, which is reassuring.
Okay, that is indeed. A question for Ray Saldana. There's something I saw on Twitter last night, a tech entrepreneur in the Bay Area advertising on Twitter. If you're a teacher in the Bay Area, we are interested in creating a pod. We will pay you more than you make for your working at your school district. We'll have like 6 or 7 students in my backyard. And anybody who helps recruit and find this teacher, I'll give you $2,000 too. So what is this saying in terms of the divide, the economic divide, and what effect this whole pandemic can have on education?
Yeah, I will say that as a leader of an organization who works in schools that oftentimes are underfunded and neglected and just compounded with issue after issue, it is not the most optimistic feeling to say that we've got one solution that might fix this for everyone, because we know the students who are going to be left out. And frankly, as I think about a situation where, you know, I think we welcome all strategies here, but the concept that I think about is that for all our students, talent is evenly distributed. Mm-hmm. What is not evenly distributed is opportunity. And if we start thinking about what the next year is going to look like, and it's get to the pod if you can, I've got families who right now, at the very least, we're buying them noise canceling headphones so that they can create a learning environment that is if you think about, you know, in a tight apartment or a tight home with 4 or 5 other people living them with one piece of technology. There is so much to solve on that front that, look, we welcome all solutions, but at the end of the day, we'll have to recognize that there needs to be a population of students, especially those in Title I communities, that need to get more resources. And so as we go out to do a call, I wonder and worry who that call is going to reach, because in some cases, we know the families that are not going to be able to respond and step up to that.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Daisy Dodd, Ray Saldana, Kara Williams. Thank you. Governor Gavin Newsom has issued rules that would keep classrooms closed in counties that are on the state's COVID-19 watch list. There are about 200 school districts in our region alone, and each one has their own plans for the school year. The plans are changing quickly, but we have an easy way to keep you informed. On abc7.com/back-to-school, you will find an interactive map listing the different districts. Click on your area, and you'll see everything from the starting date for the first day of school to the plans for providing meals and masks if in-person classes are allowed. Up next, we will talk with the president of the Teachers Union about the deal just announced this week with the LAUSD, and a mom with 5 kids in all school age will look at the distance learning challenges in their house as our ABC7 Town Hall continues. Remote learning or distance learning is not easy, especially if you have a large family. Denitra Gray has 5 children, all in different levels of education. She's trying to balance her job and making sure her kids get the education they need for their futures. But as Carlos Granda shows us, she's not sure how she can afford computers for all 5 kids and the space they each need to continue distance learning.
She's doing history, she's doing geography.
This is now a typical school day for Denitra Gray as she helps her 5 children with their work. There's not a lot of space in their apartment, so they have to sit together.
They're falling behind. They're not only falling behind because they don't have the, I'm not a teacher, I'm not qualified.
Gray says she's doing her best, but she also works and can't be here all the time with her children during the day. She also feels remote learning hasn't worked for her family. 2 are in high school, 1 in middle school, 2 in elementary school. Each child has different needs, and she simply can't afford laptops for everyone.
I take pride in raising them, trying to raise them right and everything, but I don't have the resources or the money.
This is what many families are facing as the school year begins.
Are we going to lose kids? Absolutely. How many kids? I don't know. Is it going to be a generation or 2? I have no idea. But there is going to be a fallout, and it's going to be a crisis.
The Positive Results Center is a nonprofit that reaches out to help these families. There's a young generation out there that is also missing social interaction. Just ask the little ones, and they already know.
Is it harder being at home than being at school?
Yes.
You'd rather be at school?
Yeah.
Who do you miss at school? What do you miss?
My teacher and my friends.
They're stressed out. It's stressed out for all of us, especially for the little ones that don't understand.
In addition to the fact that they don't have the resources and tools that they need, and then add on isolation, then you get depression and anxiety, which a lot of people are dealing with.
One of the issues with remote learning is that you also need a lot of independent study time, but that's certainly not easy when there's not a lot of privacy.
Like doing work right here, it's like when I'm trying to write over here, she needs the space. So stuff like that. Like if we had computer, it'd be better. Yeah, not going to school is just very tough.
I just hope that we can get the help that we need. To be above average, it has to start with the people that are able to help those that are in need.
I'm Carlos Granda, ABC7 Eyewitness News.
This week, the LA Unified School District and the union representing teachers announced a tentative agreement on how to proceed with remote learning in the fall. But as you just heard, there are still a lot of challenges for a lot of families. Joining me now is Cecily Mayart-Cruz, the president of UTLA. And let's start with the agreement that was announced this week. What does it involve?
Yes, thank you so much for having me here today and representing United Teachers Los Angeles. We are really looking at health and safety as the #1 priority, not only for our students, our families, our educators, and the communities that we serve. It's heartbreaking to hear the last segment, Ms. Gray speaking out, but those are the issues and concerns that we've brought to the table, and so has the district also brought those issues to the table, especially when we're talking about social emotional learning and trauma-informed curriculum. So a few of the things that we talked about, one is robust, what we call crisis distance learning, which is this remote learning environment. I want to be very clear that educators want nothing more than to be physically with their students. We do. We want to be with our students, but it must be health and safety are the #1 priorities. So a robust crisis distance learning program means that we want to have daily instruction. That's also, there's required minutes as to Senate Bill 98. So we will be having that. We will have asynchronous and synchronous learning. So there'll be times where students will be able to interact with their peers, like in a breakout session, and doing some independent work and such. It will be happening. There is going to be flexibility in the school day. However, it is going to be structured from 9 to 2:15. And obviously we know that there will be flexibility with that as folks are moving through.
in the process of moving toward this agreement and the discussions with teachers, a lot of them express opposition to the idea of teachers doing remote learning from an empty classroom. What would be the problem with teachers being in a classroom without students where there's obviously plenty of distance?
Right. So taking into consideration health and safety. So one, we have HVAC or air conditioned systems that sometimes the filters are not changed, to be quite honest with you. In our classrooms, there's lacking the basic materials like paper towels and cleaning things. Those are things that our educators as well as parents end up bringing those to class. So you have an empty classroom, you have your materials there, but if you've ever been on a school campus, there are folks that come in and out of your classroom all the time, whether it's just to say hi or some interaction and stuff. And then in public spaces where restrooms are, in hallways, taking into consideration huge high schools like San Pedro High, LA High, there are common places where it won't be around health and safety guidelines. And so when we asked our members overwhelmingly, 83%, said absolutely not to starting this crisis distance learning out in the fall.
All right, so here's a viewer question from D. Blas asking, how will the schools protect older school workers?
So older school workers, I guess maybe we would call them veterans instead of older school workers, just for political correctness. But yeah, I mean, health and safety is priority number one for everyone. And that's not just our veteran teachers. That's not our new teachers. That's for our students and the communities that we serve. It's very important that everyone is safe. And we felt looking at the surges and infection rates that this was our best availability to make sure that students were actually learning and getting that learning from instruction at home. Virtually.
All right. Cecily Mayer Cruz from UTLA, the president, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your availability. Still ahead here, we have a teacher, a college professor, and the superintendent of LA County Schools. They're going to be answering your questions as schools navigate these challenging times. We'll be right back.
No complaints. No complaints.
Yeah.
Thank you.
ABC7 presents Back to School, answers parents need to know, an Eyewitness News town hall event.
Distance learning, in-person classes, or a hybrid of the two? And what would that look like? No matter what your school district is planning, the decision on the best way to educate students during this pandemic is complicated. Welcome back to our ABC7 Town Hall. Back to School, answers parents need to know. I'm Mark Brown. We want to dive right back into the issues surrounding sending your kids back to school during the coronavirus health crisis. We're committed to getting you the information you need to make the best decision for your family. Here to answer more of your questions is Superintendent of Schools for LA County, Dr. Deborah Duardo, Nadine Luke, a fifth grade teacher at Palmdale Learning Plaza, and Dr. Tyrone Howard, professor of education at UCLA, who can talk about educational inequality in communities of color. We begin with Dr. Duardo and a question from our viewer, Whisper and Angie, asking, are we required by law to keep our kids in school, or can we take a school year off? What do you think? Dr. Duardo?
Very good question. Compulsory education still exists for children ages 5 through 18 until they turn 18, so they still are required to attend school.
Okay, and for Nadine Luke, Joe CH84, a viewer asking, what are some parent tips to optimize distance learning?
Some parent tips to optimize distance learning. Well, first of all, find a space somewhere in the house to have your children to go to every day. So just like in my classroom today, we made sure that children could identify an area that's their place. They could use boxes and create a little cave. They can find a pillow and sit on the floor, but to identify a space that's just theirs to be productive with their learning and comfortable. That's very important for them.
All right. I am a parent. I've got a third grader. She's going into third grade, and I've got a preschooler. Third grader's a little easier to keep focused, but my preschooler, my son, a little harder to focus on a laptop. How do you get them to not deal with distractions if they're at home? What do you do as a parent?
I can address that. One of the things that many of my parents, because we started school today, many of our parents did is they purchased headsets for the children, and that was really helpful today with our lessons. Mm-hmm. A lot of the children were completely engaged. They were removed from the distractions that were around them, and again, they had their own place. So that's one of the things that they can do to help with that.
Okay, Ms. Luke, thank you. We're going to continue, of course, and I want to have some statistics, some numbers to talk about here. Distance learning, of course, hard enough for parents and kids, even if you have a laptop or a tablet. If you don't, it's nearly impossible. In a U.S. Census household survey, 84% of California families reported having devices always or usually available for online learning. In the L.A. metro area, 91% of families reported having available devices. Riverside was ranked third to last, with just 77% of families saying they had devices. And when we break down the LA metro area by race, 95% of families with white students say they have devices available. But for Latino students, it was only 75% and only 65% for black students. I want to talk to Dr. Howard now. Can you talk a little bit about the digital divide and the effect it's having on education right now?
So this is one of the big elephants in the room, is that we know that this issue has affected communities across the board, but obviously African-American, Latino, and Asian Pacific Islander families are being hit even harder. Just a few weeks ago, the Los Angeles Unified School District put out a report showing that even though Black and brown kids had access to devices, they still were not able to log on. So my concern is that the gaps that we see in schools currently will get even wider. Why is that? Because we know for many Black and brown families, they're more likely to have their parents as essential workers, meaning that may not be at home to supervise learning, to oversee learning. We also know that many of these students may also have dual roles that they're playing, taking care of and supervising younger siblings. In some cases, we know that these children are also having to help care for elderly grandparents. So we know that deep-seated inequities hit Black and brown communities harder, which means in this moment of crisis, they're going to feel the effects even more.
And appearing on the panel with you, Dr. Howard, is Dr. Duardo, who, of course, is the head of the LA County Board of Education. What would you say to her about what she should do, her organization should do to address this inequity?
Well, I think this is bigger than just one particular district. This requires state, federal, local intervention. This is a collaborative approach. We've got to find a way to get all hands on deck. I've talked to Dr. Duardo on a number of occasions, and she's doing more than enough of her lion's share of the role. But we need philanthropic organizations. We need nonprofit organizations. We need the clergy to get involved. This is going to require all of us, especially if we're going to advocate for our most vulnerable populations. In Oakland, California, for example, what we've seen, they've got citywide virtual hubs, where they brought together different entities that are creating these learning pods, much in the way that we see happening here in more of our affluent communities, but they're doing it in low-income communities. So those Black and brown and poor children are not falling further and further behind. But we can't place this responsibility on one entity. It's got to be a collaborative effort.
Okay, and this question then for Dr. Duardo from a viewer, HappyFish213, asking, will the schools provide low-income families with school supplies?
So, schools are providing devices, laptops, and as well as doing everything possible to make sure that they're connected with Wi-Fi, but they're also providing, good old-fashioned books and other materials that students can use to engage in instruction, crayons, and other items that they need. So yes, all of the districts will be and are currently meeting with parents and having a process in place where they can come and pick up their supplies.
And a follow-up question, will the school districts offer or give free Wi-Fi to the people that don't have Wi-Fi, for Dr. Duardo?
So districts are working really hard in order to get that. They're purchasing hotspots that they're giving out to their families. We're partnering with the nonprofit organizations. We have the Greater LA Educational Foundation that has raised millions of dollars to give to districts so that they can get devices. We're also working at the state level with our state superintendent Thurman to develop partnerships with the providers to make sure that every single student has access to the internet. Some of the challenges are that some of the items are on back order, and districts are working really hard to make sure that their students have them when their school calendar begins.
Okay, which is just weeks away for so many. Thank you. And Nadine Luke, our 5th grade teacher, you're also an IEP instructor, individual education plan. I believe that's the one-on-one type situation, right, where you work with students with challenges. We have a question from a viewer, G. Lupita 4, asking, how will children with IEPs get the extra help that they need?
Well, actually, I'm a general education teacher. However, I do have students that have IEPs in my classroom. And just as we do all of the time, this time we have breakout sessions. So that way the children are still able to access the education that they need with the one-on-one. So with the Zoom, we have breakout rooms. So those students are placed in those breakout rooms so that they can get that one-on-one instruction. And additionally, we have the scaffolding and the support systems embedded within our lessons. So those students' needs are being addressed based on their IEP goals, and as well as those with 504 plans.
Okay.
So we are working diligently to make sure that those needs are addressed for our students.
All right. Remote learning, pretty much the rule throughout the area at this point. But for those who have in-person classes, a viewer, MZ Griff 77, asking, are schools going to provide extra masks? Kids will be sneezing and sweating in them. How are schools going to guarantee that kids keep their masks on? Dr. Duardo, what's your plan? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, so we're really fortunate that the governor has assisted all 80 school districts in LA County, including charter and private schools, to make sure that they have at least their first 60-day supply of the masks that they need, disinfectants, thermometers, and everything that's needed. So those will be given to students when they do physically come back to school. For students and staff as well, we'll ensure that they have all of the masks and everything that they need to implement the physical distancing and the public health orders to ensure safety.
And with regard to physical distancing, this question from viewer Berlin's World asking, can we have PE class outdoors or on Zoom? I'm concerned about my daughter's daily health. Nadine Luke, you're not an administrator, but what do you think about this idea of PE classes outdoors, on Zoom, or something that would allow for physical distancing, either before they're back in school or after?
Actually, in our district, we're doing that. We have PE via Zoom. The children have their activities and their schedule that they're doing with each day. And it worked well last semester when we were thrown into the remote learning. And we started today, and one of our classes for 5th grade met with the PE teacher today to get that outline and exactly what they would do. I think it's necessary for children to have that activity. I think they need to be able to go outside, and they can still do that with distancing themselves.
Mm-hmm. A quick question for Dr. Tyrone Howard. When you talk about the inequities that existed, that have always existed, and now seem to be exacerbated, not seem to be, are being exacerbated by the situation that we're finding ourselves in, what are we at risk of enduring once this is all over? I mean, are we going to lose a generation of kids here? What's the worst case in terms of the outcome here?
No, I think you're right, Mark. I think this is the worst case scenario, that we could very well lose a generation of young people. When you look at the very makeup of who the students are in Los Angeles County, we know that the population is overwhelmingly Black and brown. California is the 5th largest economy in the world, and Los Angeles is the biggest part of that economy. Everyone loses when California loses. Everyone loses when Los Angeles loses. So that's why we've got to all have a collective effort to ensure, what do we do to help our most vulnerable populations? Black children, brown children, our children who are oftentimes experiencing homelessness, our children who are in foster care, and even our language learners are the bulk of our economy, are the bulk of our education future, and really the bulk of our intellectual might as a nation. So the entire world, in my opinion, should be concerned about this moment here in this county, because as we go, not only does the rest of the nation go, but the rest of the world is also influenced by what happens in our county.
Our viewer, Tracy Teller's asking, some school districts are opening their on-site daycares. That'll allow for students attending to have daycare and receive assistance with their distance learning. How is this safe? This viewer asking, it's the same thing as kids attending school. Dr. Eduardo, what's your response to that?
So childcare has never been shut down. It's considered an essential service. And so some districts are providing childcare, especially for essential employees that have to work, or for students that have not been able to engage distance learning, either because of a disability or English language learners. The way that they're doing it safely is by implementing all of the health measures that the Department of Public Health has implemented, making sure that everybody is wearing a mask, that everybody is maintaining that 6 feet of physical distancing, that hand washing and sanitizing is something that occurs throughout the day, and that the numbers must be much smaller. So when we're talking about childcare, we're not talking about the large numbers of bringing everybody back to school. It is going to have to be much smaller numbers. And so districts are really going to make sure that they're bringing back those students that have the highest needs, or whose parents are essential employees and having to work. But they'll have to implement all of the safety precautions that are outlined in the Department of Public Health in their health orders.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from a student. God Bless Gabby is asking, I'm a rising senior. Should I study for the SAT? Dr. Howard, what do you think?
Yes, you should study for the SAT. But I also want to tell Gabby, too, that what's important to know in this process, because this is what colleges and universities do, you need to make sure that you do the best you can do academically, but also talk about what this moment has meant for you. The challenges, the adversity, the obstacles. What will help to make your application even more powerful is to talk about the uncanny resilience you probably have demonstrated during this trying time, because that shows university admissions readers that you're more than committed to deal with some of the challenges that comes, and you also have stayed on top of your academic demands.
You know, it's interesting you point that out. So many of the applications that students submit involve some sort of project that they've initiated to help the community, or do something to help seniors, for example, or something like that. And all of that has pretty much been shut down. So what you have left is their academic record and kind of who they are as a person. So you've really got to kind of sell yourself to a college, right?
You do, but I think oftentimes for many of the young people in our communities, the selling of their selves is about the challenges they face in their own homes, neighborhoods, and communities. Mm-hmm. And they don't face some of this, they face more of the challenges, I should say, than others might face in more affluent communities. So talk about the fact that you're caring for younger siblings. Talk about the fact that you're also tutoring younger siblings, that you're also helping aunts and uncles and grandparents who might be experiencing some health challenges. That shows the ability to manage time. It shows the ability to still be able to stay on top of your own academic work. So what we cannot have our young people do who are preparing for college is to somehow downplay this moment and to not talk about the different kinds of responsibilities that they juggled, and many of them juggle it well. Many of them are also working while they're also helping to support their families. So sell yourself, tell your story. This has not been an easy time for anyone.
All right, good advice for those aspiring seniors. Thank you very much, Tyrone Howard, Nadine Luke, and Superintendent Deborah Duardo. Thank you all for joining us. Distance learning posing a whole new set of challenges for parents with kids who have special needs. All kids are missing out on valuable socialization. What can we do about it? Up next, we'll get some advice from a child psychologist, plus solutions. We're going to look at what's working in some local school district. It's all next.
If you put a wrench in her routine, it's all over. The self-harming happens. I can only do so much at home, and ABA can do only so much at home. Where school it's very structured.
I think this group session isn't really going to work, especially for kids who have some language delays.
Distance learning can be especially stressful for families with kids who have learning disabilities. Joining me now is Dr. Karen Rogers, a psychologist at Children's Hospital in LA. And I don't know if you were able to hear the soundbite that we just played. You could hear the stress in that mom's voice, couldn't you? The difficulty that she's facing. How can parents help manage some of this back to school stress and anxiety for students with learning disabilities?
Absolutely. Children with learning disabilities particularly need the support that they had been getting at school in order to be able to learn and develop and maximally. And right now that's incredibly difficult. So you definitely could hear the stress in that mom's voice. There's a parent who's really concerned for her child's well-being and clearly working well with professionals and systems to maximize the intervention and support that her child has, and now those things are much more difficult to access. So it's a very hard time.
Yeah, it is, and which brings up the question from Doris Boris, one of our viewers, asking what is or should be the real plan for children with special needs?
Children with special needs, special education needs, all have something that's called an individualized education plan. And the reason for that is because each of them is different and has different needs in terms of learning environment and teaching strategies and goals. And so there really isn't a one-size-fits-all. But children with special education plans need to have the support that those plans are intended to provide in order for them to succeed in school.
Now, I've got two kids, both of them, one's going into the 3rd grade, one's still in preschool. Both of them say they want to get back to school, they miss their friends, and this is important. It's not just that they miss their friends and that doesn't matter. This actually does matter, and this is a question from our viewer, REG21. How will younger kids get the socialization skills that they're supposed to be learning when you've got distance learning right now?
Yeah, the 3 R's are really only a small fraction of what children get from being in school. You know, that social emotional learning, the opportunity to develop peer relationships and learn how to be in community with different types of people is an essential part of growing up for kids. And as humans, it's something that we all have a strong drive to have those social connections. And so children who are not able to go back physically to school are going to be not only feeling that loss, but also needing other types of connection strategies. I think that many teachers are thinking about social emotional learning strategies that they can use with distance learning to support the children. And there are things that parents can be doing as well.
Like what? What should parents be doing?
Well, it depends on the age of the child, clearly, but even young children can be helped to have virtual play dates with their friends. For preschoolers, that might be brief and look more like showing each other different toys, but it maintains a sense of connection. Older children are better able to manage online socializing with parent support or monitoring than very young children. But the opportunity to do this type of video chat, I think, can be really valuable for kids. And then another strategy that some families are using is to develop kind of extended family relationships with people who have children the same age, people in their neighborhood, so that the children are socializing in person with one another regularly, using masks and social distancing, but containing the number of kids that their families are interacting with.
I can tell you that I am really stressed out because I'm not an educator. I'm trying to work with my kids on their social distancing and getting frustrated because I'm not getting it right and I feel like I'm selling them short. What advice do you have to parents for just to deal with the stress of distance learning and how to cope with what inadequacies they might be feeling about this?
Yeah, so parents are not trained teachers. Many parents have other responsibilities at the same time that school is going on. I think the most important thing is to take a deep breath and remember that you can only do the best you can do. Every child in our community is experiencing this same distance learning situation. Every child's education is going to be impacted, and families can only do what they can do.
All right, and real quickly from a viewer, Mindful Misael, asking any tips on how or perhaps whether to minimize computer screen usage.
What a challenging question that is. We used to have real guidelines about how many, minutes or hours of screen time per year of age, and it goes out the window when we're doing school online and socializing online. I think it's maybe less about minimizing screen time and more about making sure to build in other types of activities for kids. Outside time, being creative at home, whether for young children it's building or drawing, and for older children, baking or helping out with things around the house, going for walks in the neighborhood. but making sure that kids are having experiences, positive experiences away from the screen.
Okay, Dr. Karen Rogers, thank you very much for joining us. Well, we've looked at a lot of the challenges for students, parents, and teachers as we enter the new school year, but what are some of the things that are working right now? Our Philip Palmer has been looking at possible solutions to help kids get the best education possible during these difficult times.
There's no one solution to the challenges parents and children are facing with distance learning due to the COVID pandemic. But over the last few months, there are some ideas that seem to be working. For families who can afford it, a home-based teacher will work with children in small, stable groups or pods.
We're probably leaning towards doing a pod of around 6 kids, maybe maximum, where you'd travel from home to home, potentially a couple of weeks at a time. We're still figuring it out, and I've just started the search for a teacher or a tutor.
There aren't specific state guidelines for group size, but Secretary of Health and Human Services Mark Galley says groups of 4 to 8 children are ideal. Carrie McDonald wrote the book on homeschooling, Unschooled, and suggests to parents who once again find themselves in charge of educating their children, avoid replicating school at home. A routine will develop, but it's okay to allow for time and space for that routine to develop that is most productive for the family.
Try not to be the curriculum enforcer or the teacher for your children, because that is likely to turn out to be something that is less rewarding for everybody.
Many families who felt they weren't getting enough work for children last school year have turned to online educational supplement platforms like OutSchool, which has grown 30 times since last year.
Schools that were providing remote learning tools and worksheets were not taking up the full day, and they were not providing the enrichment and engaging activities that kids are used to getting.
OutSchool isn't meant to replace schooling of any kind. It's to support families, just like this YMCA in Laguna Niguel, which will work closely with parents, the healthcare agency, and school districts to continue on-site childcare and learning for kids K through 8 at over 40 sites when school resumes.
We are a support system for the classroom. We are here to support their learning. We're here to support the teachers.
The San Bernardino City Unified School District will be providing meals at 15 school sites every Monday and Wednesday to help students who are distance learning. But to fill their minds, the district distributed 30,000 digital devices to students. And in the event school resumes in person in some form, Entrepreneur High School, which was formerly a Kmart, wants to be ready. If kids do come back, they'll be at desks physically distanced with plastic barriers. But for kids or parents who might not feel safe returning at the first opportunity, cameras and screens will allow for remote participation as well.
We're really going back to being able to put together a structure that is safe, that is unique, but able to meet the needs of what our parents are saying they want to see for their kids.
Philip Palmer, ABC7 Eyewitness News.
We know that heading back to school during this pandemic is complicated and each family's needs are different. We're committed to keeping the conversation going. On abc7.com/backtoschool, we have an interactive map so you can see what your child's school district has planned. Just click on your area to see what the district is doing to keep students and teachers healthy. You can also share your stories there. We thank you for joining us for this ABC7 Town Hall. Back to School, Answers Parents Need to Know. Eyewitness News at 4 starts now.
This is Eyewitness News, now at 4.
LA County dealing with increasing cases of COVID-19, looking for alternative ways to test, including stations that look like vending machines.
Saying goodbye to the first sworn LAPD officer to die of COVID-19. Officer Valentin Martinez was a 13-year veteran of the force.
And Catholic elementary schools in Orange County looking to bring students back into the classroom this fall. What has to happen before they can? Thanks for joining us. We are live at ABC7, abc7.com, streaming wherever you are on the ABC7 Los Angeles app. I'm David Ono.
And I'm Ellen Leyva. Los Angeles County closing in on 2 grim coronavirus milestones. LA now reporting nearly 200,000 cases of COVID-19 with over 4,800 deaths so far from the virus. Riverside and Orange counties are far behind, each closing in on 40,000 total cases, with San Bernardino County close behind.
Meanwhile, there are nearly 1,700 total hospitalizations across LA County, and that number is trending downward. You can see the curve after a big run-up after 4th of July. Eyewitness News reporter Rob Hayes is live with the latest on what's being done to bring these numbers down even more. Rob?
Yeah, LA County health officials today have said that they have opened more than 30,000 COVID-related investigations. They've shut down 27 bars and restaurants.